Hello, listeners. It's Gunter Swoboda here with some exciting news. We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self development, and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number one in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spigener-Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter, where I don't just talk about masculinity, I help to reimagine it. I'm a psychologist, psychotherapist, philosopher, author, and finally the founder of Making Good Men Great. Let me just stress this. This isn't self-help fluff. It's actually radical self-evolution. And today I'm going to talk about a topic that cuts deep, especially for many, many boys and men, and that's shame, guilt, and the role of the bro code. That's the role of the teenage male peer group. Let me look at how shame moves like an invisible current in most teens and their peers, shaping behaviours, enforcing patriarchal norms, and creating cycles that often persist well into adulthood. And, of course, I'll explore how we can break that cycle. So let's get the show on the road. First up, let's get clear on the difference between guilt and shame, because it matters. Guilt is internal. It says, I did something wrong. There's a sense that your action didn't align with your values. And therefore it can motivate change, it can help you grow, and it can help you repair in many ways as well. Now, what about shame? And this is where we come into the cutting edge. Shame is social. It fundamentally says that there is something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I don't belong. It's not just about what you did. It's fundamentally about who you are, especially in the eyes of others. Now, I see lots of teenage boys, young men, and even older men with quite a succinct level of social anxiety. And this is where it rests. Now, teenage boys are particularly vulnerable to shame because adolescence is when identity is being formed and peer approval becomes a primary source of self-worth. Now, let's start this examination of the bro code with a little story. Now, most of you possibly, hopefully, have been familiarised with the story of Lord of the Flies. Essentially, it's a group of boys that get shipwrecked on an island, and they start off with a sort of various attempts at order and civility. But as the veneer of structure fades, so does their sense of humanity. Now, what unfolds isn't just chaos. It's the unmasking of a deeply embedded mythos that beneath the surface male identity is driven by dominance, fear, and the enforcement of a brutal social hierarchy. Now, in many respects, Lord of the Flies isn't just fiction. It's essentially an allegory. And it's not far from the lived reality that many teenage boys navigate in group dynamics today. And it's possibly been, decades, maybe even centuries where this has been the case. But let me be very, very clear. This isn't about male nature. It's not hardwired into boys to become brutal assholes and or emotionless. What Lord of the Flies captures is what happens when boys are socialised in a patriarchal culture and then abandoned by the mediating values, guidance and emotional attunement of mature adults, especially mature adult males. The island may be metaphorical, but the rules become all too real when the scaffolding of healthy masculinity is stripped away, leaving fear, shame, guilt, competition, and power games, toxic power games that fill the void of humanity. So what happens when boys grow up in a culture that defines masculinity as dominance, controlling, emotional, silent stoicism, and competitive hierarchy? In those conditions, peer groups become enforcers of the masculine code, the bro code, and its most powerful tool is shame. Shame becomes the tool of discipline. If you step out of line, if you show vulnerability, express fear, or question a harmful behaviour, you risk being ridiculed, ostracised, or worse. And it doesn't stop on one occasion. I've worked with boys who went through their whole high school years being bullied. Now, let me break this down into a couple sort of real examples. Now, obviously, they're not out of my client load. They are sort of pastiches in a way, I'll put stuff together. So there's a 15-year-old boy who lies to his mates about sleeping with someone to avoid being labelled a virgin or gay. Why? Because in the bro code, sexual conquest is a proof of manhood. Shame is used to police perceived weakness. Now, the interesting thing is, what we actually discover, when we examine, the sexual prowess of most teenage boys, they usually talk about being sexually active earlier and with lots more girls than what they actually are. It's an exaggeration. It's there to position themselves into a higher level of the hierarchy and therefore have status. Now, the other issue that occurs frequently, unfortunately all too frequently, 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 kids at school get bullied. And again, in many ways, this could apply to boys and girls, but I'm talking about boys. In teenage peer groups, boys often gang up on the soft kid, the quiet, artistic or sensitive one, the nerd. Why? Bullying often becomes a way to avoid being seen as vulnerable themselves. If you go on the attack, you're less likely to be the next prey. So, again, the shame is redirected outward. It's a defense mechanism. If I humiliate him, I won't be the one humiliated. There's also a part of the code which says essentially suffer in silence. It's group silence about struggle. A teen is struggling with anxiety. But when he brings it up, he's told to man up. Now, fortunately, some of this is changing, but not enough. There's still lots and lots of stuff, and the other conditions often come into play as well. So most boys try to toughen it out. You know, they stop expressing their pain, their hurt, their fears. Why? Because embedded in our culture, we still have this thing that emotional pain equals weakness, and weakness equals shame. Another part of this bro code, or the peer group dynamics of teenagers, can sometimes be vandalism or reckless acts. Boys often engage in destructive behaviour, not out of malice, but to gain peer approval. And when you actually ask them, why did you do this, you often get a blank look, and you can see them struggling with, why did I do that? What was that about? Most of the time, it's not because they're just, an evil little dude that just goes on a destructive bent. This is generally part of group relationships. On their own, they tend not to do stuff like this. So the unspoken test is, are you daring enough? Now, I experienced that being part of the surf culture. As it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we would stand on the beach staring at it, each of us in our own little world going, holy shit, do I really want to go out in that? And usually someone breaks the silence and goes, come on, guys, let's do it. And without thinking about it, without reflecting on whether we've got the skills or not, we all hit it out. Now, sometimes, and most of the time, fortunately, it ended up quite well. But occasionally, there was a bad experience. Sometimes an injury. So not participating in the group together leads to being labelled as scared, soft, or a pussy. And that's the last thing most boys want to be called. Now, here's the kicker. All of this reinforces patriarchal norms. The peer group becomes a microcosm of a larger system that says, to be a man, you must dominate. To have value, you must suppress feelings. To belong, you must conform, even if it means harming yourself or others. Unfortunately, these days, only too often do I see boys who've been on the rough end of peer groups. The old thing about, if you're going to fight someone, you do it one-on-one seems to have gone out the window. And now it's not unusual for 4 or 5 guys to pick on one guy, beat the shit out of him and then leave him alone. Now, in some cases, that ends up very, very, very badly. So the idea that might have been part of the patriarchy in the Middle Ages about chivalry, about fairness, about, honour, doesn't seem to work that well these days. And part of it is because there are other values that hold a higher priority. Dominance, control, and competition. So what do we do? How do we get out of this thing? Well, firstly, let me talk about what the cost is here. So most of you will understand that this has a massive mental health cost. Anxiety, depression, self-harm, avoidance, isolation. But all too often it also ends up in violence, either towards oneself or others. And we disconnect. We disconnect from our own emotions, from meaningful relationships, and from a sense of inner worth. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop in adolescence or with the end of adolescence and moving into adulthood. A lot of the guys that I work with are in therapy, often because they are still carrying shame first instilled by their peers. So, what do? How do we intervene? Well, this is the long-term plan. We need to get boys to allow themselves to normalise expressing emotions. We need to teach and model to boys that emotions are human. They're not weak, they're not girly, they're just human. Give them language for their inner world. Anger, grief, sadness, joy, fear, respect. That's the language we need to help boys get in touch with and feel comfortable using. Create an environment where the peer group actually takes on a safe environment. That might be in sports teams, in classrooms, and in youth groups. I talk about these communities as attachment communities, where we feel not just attached to them, but we feel a sense of alignment. We feel a sense of attunement. We get each other. We understand each other. And when it's under the umbrella of the right values, then we're on safe territory. The other part to this is encouraging accountability without shame. And unfortunately, often discipline at home, at schools, in sporting arenas, is actually done with shaming them. Now, sometimes when I do the wrong thing, that guilt that I feel can motivate change. When my partner says to me, I don't feel really that cared for by you right now, I'm going to feel guilty. But rather than tucking it away and sort of hoping that the whole issue goes away, I can go, okay, well, I need to step it up a bit. Let me demonstrate love and respect through caring explicitly. Okay? Now, if we shame boys, all that will just be driven underground. We get rebellious, reactive. We punch the wall. Right? So, in that context, one way to get this really out into the open and clearly understood is that we as men, as fathers, brothers, father-in-laws, whatever, we need to model that courage that can come with masculinity that's not based on some preconceived idea that stems from patriarchy, from the sort of traditional male norms. We adults, and I talked about mature adults in the context of Lord of the Flies, we need to be the man who talks about how I feel, who apologises when I'm wrong, who listens without having this deep-seated drive to fix the other person or their problem. That's what the new masculinity, the new male role model should be about. And we also should actually talk about shame itself, right? Normalise a conversation about shame. Talk to boys about when have you felt not good enough? What did you feel you had to hide? Just asking the question breaks the silence of shame. Now, all of us know that adolescence is a crucible. It's where boys either start armouring up or, hopefully, optimistically, they begin to explore who they truly are without the masks that are forced upon them. Shame doesn't have to be a life sentence, but it takes a conscious, intentional effort to rewrite that script. So let's come together to build a generation of young men who are not only strong, but emotionally literate, compassionate, and confident enough to break the cycle of shame and to be respectful of others' differences. So let me thank you for joining me today on Inspired Change with Gunter. If you're a parent, teacher, coach, or just someone who gives a shit, have this conversation. Start small, but start. Join me each week as I cut through outdated scripts of manhood and explore what it means to live, lead, and love with emotional fluency, with an embodied ethic, and with an existential authenticity. You know, there's the issue that it takes a risk to be fully alive. And if you're going to play it safe, it's not the way to go. You're not just stifling yourself. You're stifling the community that you are part of because you're robbing them of your sense of self, your, knowledge and wisdom, your caring. Because most of us haven't. So, this is it for another episode, and so allow me to sign off. Here in Australia, we're entering the Easter period, so if you're travelling, be safe, but enjoy the holidays. Until next time, this is me, signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.